I pretended not to notice that the guard was asleep when I came into the reception area of the Beckons Hospital. The door didn't close properly, so I gave it a little slam and watched the old man jump up and look at me as though he was looking at the devil himself. God knows what these people dream of when they sleep, especially considering that it had only been less than a week since the incident. "Mr. Gomez," he said, his voice still crackling with sticky spit from when you just wake up. He cleared his throat. "I'm here for Isabel. She said she was going to get here a little bit earlier than usual." "Ah, yes," he said, looking through a clipboard he held in front of him. He didn't read anything from it, I could tell, but he stood up and pointed me toward the break room. The giant digital clock above the door frame read 4:43, right on schedule. "Over there," he said. "She should be in there." I was wondering if the guard even knew who stepped foot in there, but I took his word for it and walked over. I tried not to look toward the constant beeping overlapping from the two rooms down the dark hallway to my left. And that hallway seemed to never end, despite this being such a small hospital. I think it was built back when there were more people there. I remember it from when I was a kid, coming to visit my uncle a couple of times, even though he didn't die here. He went to die in the city. My dad used to tell me that nobody dies in this town. I believed him. Well, up until he died in his own bedroom. A heart attack, they said. I opened the break room. Isabel was sitting there looking toward the microwave, a white coffee cup on the table next to her. Her dark hair falling straight down and over her shoulder. She turned around, quickly, her brown eyes locking with mine for the first time, wide open, scared, and then relieved. "Mr. Gomez?" she asked, standing up to come shake my hand. "Thanks for taking the time," I started. "I already took the accounts from Kate and Ruth. The first time I hear anything like it." Isabel looked at the clock over the microwave and then back at me, gesturing with her whole arm to sit, but without even sitting down herself just yet. She just started. She was punctual. It made sense for her as a longtime supervisor, the nurse. "Claire was strange. Not anything against her, but..." She stopped suddenly. "Well, okay, this place, as you know, is a little run down. Old, usually empty, not enough people in town, you know." She stopped again. It was obvious that she didn't know where to begin. Normal from everyone, although people from small towns are generally more trusting than normal, or overly paranoid. "Tell me about Claire. How did she get here, and did you ever notice anything unusual about her?" Based on how she started and the level of detail that she offered, Isabel was definitely a trusting person. "You see, Claire has started along with 3 other nurses, young ladies, all graduating from one of those new programs in the city. They all came here. I think 2 of them lived together and 2 lived by themselves. Clara had tried to get a roommate, but nobody wanted to room with her because of her issues." Isabel paused here for a moment. "You know, one of their professors stopped by not long after they started working here. All part of the same class, and everyone knew her. I thought she was coming here to say hi to them. But when she came back to talk to me, she mentioned Claire right away. She said to give her a fair chance. She hadn't made many friends, and that her obsession was not anything that was interfering with her professional work." "Obsession?" I interrupted. That's when Isabel told me about Claire's non-stop conversation about death, dying animals, near-death experiences, and every single new article that was coming out online. That the dead could hear you for minutes after they passed. A recent study on reanimating rats, and other more supernatural ideas like angels and dreams. It was all she talked about, Isabel continued. Her colleagues were concerned, but I remember the words of her professor. "Give her a chance. She's all right." And it worked for a time. For a time, it was right. Up until the accounts I got from the other nurses, and now with Isabel's story, I'd never heard of anything remotely similar to what happened with Claire. Isabel hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the break room door as though she expected someone or something to walk in. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against the side of her coffee cup, a soft, nervous beat that was loud against the silence. Finally, she exhaled sharply, shaking her head. Claire was always different, Isabel said, her voice almost a whisper. But that night of the incident, it was like something changed. She wasn't just obsessed anymore. She was convinced. I leaned forward, lowering my own voice to match hers. Convinced of what? That death wasn't the end. That it was just another kind of beginning. She told the other nurses she had proof. Isabel's words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. She said she had seen things, heard things, that this hospital wasn't empty. And I knew that. You would hear footsteps or voices here and there, and in all my time here in an old building that has seen it all, you're sort of bound to, right? A cold prickle crept up the back of my neck. And the others? Did they see anything? Isabel nodded, the movement still and reluctant. Kate said she saw Claire talking to someone in the hallway one night during her shift. But when she got closer, there was no one there. It was just Claire, standing in front of the window. Isabel's voice faltered. Kate swears she saw Claire's reflection smiling at something, but it wasn't the kind of smile you would give a friend. It was wrong. Too wide. Too empty, I finished for her, the word leaving a strange taste in my mouth, like chewing gum after the flavor's gone. She nodded again. And then there was the incident. I noticed her hands tremble as she gripped her coffee cup. The steam had long since stopped rising, but she clung to it like a lifeline. It was 2 nights ago, she began, her voice breaking on the last word. Claire was on shift with Kate and Ruth. The patients were all asleep. The halls were quiet. At least, that's what they thought. Isabel's gaze drifted toward the door again, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing against us. Kate said she heard humming. It was coming from room 6. My brow furrowed. Room 6? The other said that room was empty. It is, Isabel whispered, her voice almost inaudible. It has been for years. We technically can't use it for storage, but we keep some of the bedding in there sometimes. But Kate swore Claire was in there, humming to herself. She went to check, and Ruth followed her. But when they opened the door, and Isabel paused, swallowing hard, as if trying to push the memory back down, adjusting her neck. I leaned in, my breath barely a whisper. What did they see? They found Claire standing in the middle of the room, holding one of the patient monitors, Isabel said. Her words were slow and deliberate. But it wasn't off. It was on and beeping. My stomach twisted. Beeping? Tracking what? Isabel's eyes logged onto mine, wide and filled with a fear so palpable I could almost feel it in my chest. Heartbeat. Strong and steady heartbeat. A shiver ran through me, and for the first time I noticed how cold the room had become. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed louder now, almost like it was vibrating against the side of my head. Did they check the equipment? I asked, my voice firmer than I felt. There's no way. They didn't have time, Isabel interrupted. Her voice cracked and she gripped the coffee cup tighter. The light started flickering and then the monitor stopped. The beeping just cut out. But Claire, she just smiled. She looked at them and said, "It's not death if they never leave." What happened next? Well, by the time I got there, Claire was gone, Isabel said. She had 2 days off after that, and I'm not sure if she's going to show up. I hope she doesn't. The weight of her words pressed down on me, heavy and oppressive. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but a sudden, faint noise cut me off. It was humming. Soft, melodic, and echoing faintly from the hallway. Isabel froze, her face draining of color. "That's her," she whispered. Her eyes darted toward the door and then back to me. "It's Claire." I felt like she kind of wanted to stand up to meet her, but she held back. The lights flickered overhead, and the room plunged into brief darkness. When the fluorescent bulbs buzzed back to life, Isabel was already on her feet, backing toward the corner. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and strained to hear the sound again. The humming grew louder, impossibly clear. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. "Stay here," I said, with my knees catching on the last second when I stood up. I stepped out into the hallway, the air heavy with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something metallic. The beeping from room 6 had started again. The hallway was colder than it should have been, and the faint hum of machinery seemed louder with each step. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in random patterns, casting shadows that flickered and danced on the walls. Room 6 was straight ahead, its door slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness. I hesitated, glancing back at the break room. Isabel stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, and her lips forming silent prayers. The humming had stopped, but the beeping from inside room 6 grew louder, insistent. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room, and it smelled wrong. Beneath the sterile scent of antiseptic, there was something sour, like old blood, and the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. The monitor by the empty bed was lit, its screen displaying a rhythmic heartbeat. But the bed was empty. "What the hell?" I muttered, leaning closer to inspect the machine. The monitor wasn't connected to anything. No electrodes, no wires, just a faint, steady beep, beep, beep. And suddenly a voice spoke behind me. "You see it, don't you?" I spun around. Claire stood in the doorway, her dark hair disheveled and her eyes gleaming with strange intensity. She looked thinner than the photos Isabel had shown me. Her cheeks were hollow, and her skin was almost translucent in the flickering light. "Claire," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "you've got people worried about you. Isabel's been—" "She doesn't understand," Claire interrupted, stepping into the room. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it, a dangerous certainty. "None of them do." I glanced at the monitor again, and then back at her. "Claire, what's going on here? What's with the monitor and the beeping?" "It's proof," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "Proof that they're still here." "They?" "The patients. The ones who passed. They don't go anywhere. They linger, waiting, watching. I've been trying to show them, to prove it to them. But they wouldn't listen. Not until the incident." My throat felt dry, The incident? Claire tilted her head, her smile faltering. The old man in room 3, Mr. Calderon. He was dying. We all knew it. I stayed with him that night. I watched over him, waited for the moment his heart stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And when it did, I felt it. I felt him stay. I took a cautious step back. My hand was brushing against the doorframe. What do you mean you felt him stay? Claire's expression darkened. You wouldn't understand. None of you would. But I proved it. I've been proving it every single time someone dies in this hospital. Their energy lingers, trapped between life and death. But it's not death if they never leave. The room seemed to grow colder. My breath misted in front of me, and I realized with a jolt that the beeping from the monitor had stopped. Claire took another step closer, her eyes locked on mine. You don't believe me, but you will. You'll see. What did you do, Claire? My voice was firmer now, though my pulse was racing. Her smile returned, wider this time, almost feral. I've been helping them stay just a little longer, just enough to understand. You can talk to them if you know how to listen. A soft creak echoed from behind me, and I turned to see the bed. It was empty, still neatly made, but the faint impression of a body seemed to press against the sheets, as though someone invisible had just laid down. I stepped back instinctively, my heart hammering. Claire, this needs to stop. Whatever you're doing, you're playing with things you don't understand. Her laughter was sharp and hollow. I understand perfectly. You're the one who doesn't see it. The lights flickered again, and the air grew colder still. The faint sound of a voice, a low, raspy whisper, seemed to drift through the room. It was impossible to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably mournful. They want to talk to us, Claire said, her voice trembling with excitement. They're trying to talk to us. And then the monitor lit up again, the steady beep replaced by an erratic, frantic rhythm. The impression on the bed grew deeper, and the sheets were wrinkling as if unseen hands were clutching at them. Claire, stop, I shouted, my voice breaking. She didn't listen. Instead, she stepped closer to the bed, her hands outstretched. It's okay, she whispered to the empty space. I'm here. I'll help you. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices filling the room, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The monitor flatlined. Claire turned to me, her eyes wide, her face pale. They're gone, she said, her voice barely audible. But they'll be back. They always come back. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Grabbing her arm, I pulled her out of the room, slamming the door shut behind us. But what are you doing? She protested, struggling against my grip. Getting you out of here, I said. This isn't right, Claire. Whatever you're messing with, it's not natural. She stopped struggling and turned to face me, her expression calm, almost serene. You can't stop it, she said. Death isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Her words echoed in my mind as we walked down the hallway, the faint sound of humming following us like a shadow. And the humming continued down the hallway, faint but persistent, like an invisible presence breathing down my neck. I held Claire by the arm, her body unnervingly light, as if she was barely tethered to this world. She didn't resist, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, her lips still moving as though she were carrying on a silent conversation. Where "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice soft, almost dreamy. "Somewhere safe," I said, though the words felt hollow. In truth, I wasn't sure where safe even was anymore. We reached the reception area, and I glanced over the old security guard. He was slumped in his chair again, but something about his position seemed off. I froze. His head was tilted back, his mouth slightly open, his chest unnaturally still. "Is he?" I began, stepping closer. "He's not gone yet," Claire said, her voice serene. Before I could respond, the lights overhead dimmed, and a strange, oppressive stillness settled over the room. The faint mist seemed to gather around the guard's chair, swirling in lazy spirals. The air grew colder, and the faint scent of lilies, sweet, were filling my nostrils. Then the whispering began. It was soft at first, like wind rustling through leaves, but it grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was desperate, pleading. Claire stepped forward, her face illuminated by the eerie glow of the reception desk's digital clock. 4:57. The numbers flickered, glitching in and out. "They're here," she said, her voice trembling with awe. "Who's here?" I demanded, though my own voice felt small, swallowed up by the many whispers. "The ones who stayed, the ones who can't let go." The mist thickened, cooling around the guard's chair, and for a moment I thought I saw shapes in the fog, faces contorted with grief and longing, their eyes hollow and searching. One of them leaned closer to the guard, its misty hand reaching toward his chest. "Stop!" I shouted, instinctively stepping forward. But Claire caught my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You can't stop it," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "It's not something you fight. It's something you understand." I turned to her, anger boiling beneath my fear. "Understand what? That you've been playing with forces you don't comprehend? That you've turned this hospital into some kind of gateway?" Her expression softened, and for the first time she looked almost human. "It's not a gateway. It's a bridge. One we've all crossed without realizing it." Her words struck something deep within me, a memory I had long buried. My father slumped in his favorite chair, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with fear as the life drained out of him. It had been too late to save him, and for years I had carried the weight of that failure, convinced I could have done something, anything, to change the outcome. Claire must have seen the shift in my expression, because she smiled faintly. "You felt it, haven't you? The moment when someone leaves? That thin veil between here and there? It's not emptiness, Mr. Gomez. It's connection." The mist began to dissipate, and the guard stirred, coughing and gasping as if he had been underwater. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror, and whispered, "They're waiting." I didn't have time to ask him what he meant, because a clock on the wall chimed, a low, resonant tone that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. It was 5 a.m. Claire stepped away from me, her form seeming to blur at the edges like an image out of focus. "They've always been here," she said, her voice distant. "Watching, listening, waiting for someone to understand." "Understand what?" I demanded, but she didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back down the hallway, her figure dissolving into the darkness. I stood there, the whispers fading into silence, the cold air slowly warming. The guard looked at me, his face pale and drawn, and muttered, "Get out of here." Well, I didn't need to be told twice. As I stepped outside, the first rays of dawn pierced through the trees, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. I stood there for a moment, the events of the night swirling in my mind like a storm. Claire's words echoed in my head. It's not death if they never leave. I thought of my father, of the night I had spent in his old bedroom after he passed, convinced I could still feel his presence. Was it grief? Guilt? Or had there been something more? I didn't have answers, but for the first time in years I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe death wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was a bridge. But bridges were dangerous places, I realized. They connected two worlds. They could also collapse under the weight of too many crossing at once. As I drove away from Beckon's hospital, the sun rising behind me, I made a silent vow to let the dead rest and to focus on the living. Whatever Clara had found, whatever she had proven, wasn't meant for people like me to understand. That story was Claire, written by me for Scary Story Podcast. And if you want to get in touch, links to everything are in the description of this episode. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you very much for watching. Keep it scary, everyone. See you soon.